Iran is no longer reacting, it's dictating. The Russia meeting that changes everything for decades. Western strategy in the Middle East was built on a single foundational assumption. Iran could be contained, pressured, isolated, sanctioned into submission. Surrounded by American allies, American bases, American warships, and if it pushed too hard, bombed back into compliance. That assumption is now, officially, in serious trouble. Because while the United States is trying to negotiate a nuclear deal in Islamabad, while Israel is flattening cities in Lebanon, while oil markets are reacting to every ceasefire rumor with a $10 swing, Iran's foreign minister was in Moscow, sitting across from Vladimir Putin. And what came out of that room is not just a diplomatic meeting, it is a signal, a clear, deliberate, carefully timed signal about who Iran thinks it is now and what kind of world it intends to help build. Pay attention, because this meeting changes the geometry of everything. Let's place this in context, because the timing here is not accidental. Nothing in geopolitics ever is. Iran is currently in the middle of a war, a direct, shooting war with the United States and Israel. The strikes began on February 28, when American and Israeli forces launched coordinated attacks against Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure. Supreme Leader Khamenei was killed. Iran's ballistic missile program was severely damaged. The Strait of Hormuz was closed. A two-week ceasefire brokered through Pakistan followed in April, but it is fragile, contested, and has not produced a permanent agreement. Iran and the United States are still in indirect negotiations, with the nuclear question unresolved and Lebanon still being bombarded by Israeli airstrikes that Tehran says violate the spirit of any ceasefire. This is the moment, this specific, volatile, high-stakes moment in which Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, flew to Moscow and met with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Not a low-level diplomatic visit, not a routine check-in between foreign ministries. The foreign minister of a country at war with the United States, sitting face-to-face with the president of Russia, which has its own, deep, unresolved conflict with the Western alliance over Ukraine, and emerging from that, meeting with what both governments are describing as a strengthened strategic partnership. Ask yourself, why now? Why this meeting, at this moment, in this specific week? The answer to that question tells you almost everything you need to know about where this conflict is heading. To understand what Iran and Russia are doing together, you have to understand what each of them needs from the other, and why this moment, uniquely, gives both of them leverage they did not have before. Start with Iran. 6 weeks ago, Iran was a country under existential military pressure. Its supreme leader had just been assassinated. Its nuclear facilities had been struck. Its economy, already battered by years of American sanctions, was absorbing the additional shock of a shooting war. The Strait of Hormuz closure was disrupting not just Western shipping but Iran's own oil exports. Internally, the country was dealing with a succession crisis, with different factions sending conflicting signals about whether to negotiate or escalate. In that environment, Iran needed something specific: international legitimacy, a counterweight to the American-Israeli military coalition. A great power that would stand up in the UN Security Council and say explicitly that the US-Israel strikes on Iran were not justified, were not legal, were not the actions of a responsible world order. Russia did exactly that. Along with China, Russia abstained from the UN Security Council resolution on the conflict, criticizing it as unbalanced. Russian and Chinese diplomats said publicly that the resolution failed to address the initial strikes on Iranian soil. That is not a small thing. That is Russia and China, two permanent members of the Security Council, two nuclear powers providing Iran with diplomatic cover at its most vulnerable moment. And now, with the ceasefire fragile and negotiations ongoing, Iran's foreign minister goes to Moscow. The message could not be clearer. Iran is not isolated. Iran has friends in very high places, and any deal the United States tries to impose on Tehran will have to contend with the fact that Russia and China are watching, and they are not neutral. Now look at it from Russia's side. Russia is engaged in its own grinding conflict in Ukraine. Western sanctions have constrained its economy. Its relationship with the United States and NATO is at the lowest point since the Cold War. And now, suddenly, The United States is fully engaged in a major shooting war in the Middle East, a war that is consuming military resources, diplomatic bandwidth, political capital, and public attention that might otherwise be focused on Europe. For Russia, an emboldened, strategically connected Iran that keeps the U.S. tied down in the Middle East is not a problem. It is an opportunity. A prolonged Middle East crisis that strains American alliances, raises oil prices, which benefits Russia's energy revenues and fractures Western unity, is very much in Vladimir Putin's interest. So when you look at this meeting between Arakchi and Putin, you are not looking at two countries simply exchanging pleasantries. You are looking at two powers that have found, in this specific crisis, a deep and mutually reinforcing alignment of interests, and that alignment is actively shaping the battlefield not just diplomatically, but strategically. Because here is the dimension of this story that is not getting nearly enough attention. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. We have talked about this before in terms of oil prices and global shipping. But let's go deeper, because the strategic meaning of that control has shifted significantly in the context of the Russia meeting. The Strait of Hormuz is not just an energy choke point, it is a pressure valve. Iran can open it and signal willingness to negotiate. It can keep it partially closed and signal that it still has cards to play. It can mine it and escalate to a point where the U.S. Navy is forced to prioritize mine-clearing operations over military strikes. Every day that the strait remains even partially restricted, the economic pressure on the global economy and on the American administration trying to manage that economy grows. Now add Russia's support. Russia is not going to help Iran reopen the strait. Russia benefits from elevated oil prices. Every barrel of disrupted Gulf oil that gets replaced by Russian oil sold to China and India and the global south is money in Moscow's account. Russia has every incentive to encourage Iran to hold its position at the strait and zero incentive to push Tehran toward a quick deal. And here is the revelation that makes this meeting in Moscow the most important diplomatic event of this entire crisis so far. Iran is not, at this moment, negotiating under duress. Iran is negotiating from a position of leverage. Real, tangible, globally consequential leverage. The Strait of Hormuz is its economic weapon. Russia and China are its diplomatic shield. The ceasefire fragility in Lebanon is its military card. And the succession of Khamenei with Iran's new leadership still consolidating power and sending mixed signals is its procedural escape hatch. We need more time. The new leadership needs to review the terms. Nothing can be finalized yet. Every one of those cards was in play in Moscow this week, and Putin, who is nothing if not a careful reader of leverage and weakness, met with Iran's foreign minister and handed Tehran a stamp of great power legitimacy at exactly the moment when Iran needed it most. Iran is no longer reacting to this crisis. It is managing it. Let's think through what this means strategically, because the implications extend well beyond the current ceasefire negotiations. The United States entered this conflict with a specific theory of the case: hit Iran hard enough, fast enough, and Tehran would come to the table on American terms, eliminate Khamenei, degrade the nuclear program, shatter the proxy network, and Iran would have no choice but to accept a deal that dismantled its nuclear ambitions and ended its support for armed groups across the region. That theory was not irrational. It was based on a real assessment of the damage the strikes caused. But it missed something. It missed the Russia-China factor. It missed the possibility that Iran would not be isolated in the aftermath of the strikes, that the international response would be more divided than Washington anticipated, that Russia and China would provide political cover rather than joining Western condemnation, and that Iran would be able to leverage that cover into a negotiating position that is considerably stronger than a country that just had its supreme leader assassinated should theoretically occupy. The Rachel Maddow framework for understanding this, the analytical lens that I think cuts through the noise, is this: in any conflict, what matters is not just military capability. It is the relationship between military capability and diplomatic position. You can win every battle and still lose the war if your diplomatic position erodes. And right now, Iran's diplomatic position, backed by Russia, supported by China, with the global South largely critical of the U.S.-Israel strikes, is considerably stronger than its military position would suggest. That is the central strategic challenge facing the Trump administration in the Islamabad negotiations. It is not just a question of what Iran's nuclear program looks like. It is a question of whether the international architecture that the U.S. needs to enforce any deal sanctions compliance, monitoring mechanisms, allied be-in is still intact. And the Moscow meeting is a data point suggesting that it may not be as intact as Washington assumed. Here is why this matters for you, directly and concretely. The Strait of Hormuz is still not fully open. Oil prices are elevated. Every time talks stall, energy markets react. That price at the gas pump, the cost of shipping, the grocery store prices that have been stubbornly high, all of it is connected to a waterway 21 miles wide on the other side of the planet, and to a diplomatic meeting in Moscow that most American news coverage gave about 45 seconds. Beyond the economic impact, there is a strategic reality that every American should understand. The United States is now in a multi-front geopolitical competition, not just with Iran, with the Russia-Iran-China axis that is actively working to reshape the international order. The war in the Middle East is not separate from the competition with Russia over Ukraine and with China over Taiwan and trade. They are all connected. The countries on the other side of that competition understand the connections and are exploiting them. The question is whether the American government and the American public understand them too. And there is a moral dimension as well. The longer this conflict continues without a durable diplomatic framework, the higher the civilian cost. Lebanon is being flattened. Gaza remains in humanitarian catastrophe. Iran's civilian population is absorbing economic devastation. Every week of stalled negotiations is another week of preventable suffering that is happening in the context of a geopolitical chess match being played by governments, not by the people paying the price. Two questions I want you to carry with you as this story develops. The first, what does Russia actually want out of this alliance with Iran? And at what point do Russian interests and Iranian interests diverge? Because they are not perfectly aligned. Russia wants elevated oil prices and American distraction. Iran wants a deal that lifts sanctions and guarantees its security. Those goals can coexist, but they can also come into tension. And when they do, the Russia-Iran partnership may prove less durable than it currently appears. The second, how does the United States recalibrate its negotiating strategy now that the diplomatic isolation of Iran has clearly failed? Do the Islamabad talks continue on the current trajectory maximum demands, limited flexibility, or does Washington recognize that it is negotiating with a country that has more leverage than anticipated, and adjust accordingly? The answer to that question will determine whether this ceasefire becomes a lasting framework or simply a pause before the next escalation. Those answers are not here yet, but they are coming, and when they do, we will walk through every layer of them together. Here is the line that I keep coming back to as I think about this story. For the past several decades, American foreign policy in the Middle East operated on the assumption that the United States was the only truly indispensable power in that region, that no deal could be made without Washington, that no war could be sustained without American tolerance, that Iran, ultimately, had nowhere to go but toward America's terms. That assumption was always more fragile than it looked. And this week, in a meeting between Iran's foreign minister and Vladimir Putin, cracked a little further. Iran is building something, an alternative architecture, a set of relationships and leverages and alliances that allow it to survive the military pressure it is under and negotiate from a position of something other than pure desperation. Whether that architecture holds, whether Russia's support is durable, whether China's diplomatic cover translates into real strategic backing, all of that remains to be seen. But the meeting happened. The signal was sent, and in the world of geopolitics, signals matter almost as much as actions. Watch Moscow, watch Beijing, watch the Strait of Hormuz, and don't stop watching. Because the story of who shapes the Middle East and who shapes the world order that emerges from this crisis is being written right now.